8 things that buyers should never agree to in this market. Stay tuned. So, what are the 8 things that you need to make sure that you don't accept if you're buying a home in today's market? Well, let's start with this one. Never see a home or a property without a real estate agent, and especially without a signed buyer agency agreement. I'm still hearing from buyers who are working with agents and haven't even signed anything, right? So, for starters, realtors, we have to do better. And buyers, this agreement isn't just to protect the agent, it protects you also. So if you're going to make an offer and it turns out the seller isn't offering any type of compensation for your buyer's agent, well, your agent might suddenly be asking you to pay 3 or 4% out of pocket. Now, that really shouldn't be a surprise at this point. But if you had an agreement in place beforehand and everything would have been clear for starters, and also if you wanted the seller to pay all of or part of your agent's commission, well, you need that agreement in writing to be able to negotiate with the seller. So don't leave it to chance. Get the agreement signed before you tour any homes. All right, speaking of paperwork, right? One of the things that I always recommend to our buyers is you got to make sure that whatever documents the sellers give to you, don't just rely on that, right? So never agree to buy a home without getting a clear, your own inspector to come out. This could be a survey, home inspection, or termite inspection. Really, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure it comes from someone who's looking out for you, not the seller. So I literally had this come up a few days ago on a property. We were representing the buyer. The sellers actually had the home tented, but even though they gave us a termite report, it turns out there was over $4,000 worth of dry rot, fungus, all this wood damage to the fascia and eaves, right? And so if we would have just gone along with what the seller's termite report, wood destroying pest report would have said, you know what? That would have meant that my buyer wouldn't have been able to negotiate with the sellers for that $4,000. So don't just think that because the sellers are giving you reports that you can't bring out your own plumber, HVAC, qualified specialist, whoever it may be that's going to look out for you. You need representation to protect you. You're not buying a pack of gum or a carton of milk. This is going to be one of your biggest financial investments, so it's critical that you make sure you do this. All right, next. Never skip the final walkthrough. Now, this one kind of might seem a little obvious, and it's a small step, right? You think, okay, well, what could possibly happen? But it's incredibly important. And I've heard of buyers, right? They go straight to basically at the end of close of escrow, they get the keys, and after they close escrow, guess what? They realize that the sellers damaged something, right? So you really want to confirm that the home is in good condition. Well, let me give you a couple of examples. So one of them happened to us years ago. Now, this is during the foreclosure crisis, and this was a short sale. And this one, the house was sold as is, and we knew that. So we went to go do the final walkthrough, and after a really large rainstorm, even though we knew that the roof was shot, guess what? The living room ceiling had collapsed when we went to go do the final walkthrough. Thank goodness we went to go do it. Now, the bank basically said, hey, the property's sold as is. And we said, hey, look, we're not asking you to repair the roof, but the house needs to be delivered to the buyer in the same condition that the buyer actually wrote the offer to it. So what that meant was that the seller, the bank, actually had to give a credit to our buyer so that we're able to make that repair. So this is really critical, especially if the seller is going to be leaving, refrigerators, freezers, washer and dryers, other items, or if they've made repairs. You want to take the time and basically make sure that everything has been done properly. Another big one, never make an offer sight unseen. Please don't base your offer solely on online photos. I've had multiple buyers fall in love with homes online, ready to bid over asking. And then only they see the house in person and realize it was not a good fit. And actually, one of the buyers thought the house was perfect, but once they visited, they realized the house was too small and it lacked the essential space that they really needed. So another buyer, we've had this many times happen before, but this one wanted to offer $75,000 over the list price before they even walked through the door. And we literally had to tell them, hey, let's see the house first. And I understand emotions can really drive, these irrational decisions sometimes, but don't fall for it. Always walk through the home, run the comps with your real estate agent, and make sure the price reflects the actual condition and market value. Now, I get it. A lot of times we deal with relocation clients and they can't come out here. At the very least, have your real estate agent walk through with a really good camera and be able to send you a full walkthrough video. Not on FaceTime. Have something that's a high quality video that your real estate agent can narrate and make sure that you see all the nooks and crannies and all the positives and negatives of the home. All right, next, never agree to a sale or a purchase contingency without a time limit. Right? So if a seller says, we need to find another home before we can sell this one, that's okay. But there needs to be a deadline on it. So if there's no end date, your deal could be tied up for months. So you need to work with your real estate agent or attorney to make sure that the contract includes a clause stating that the seller must be under contract on their new home right by a certain date. Now, here in California, there's a form for that, and usually it's typically 17 days. And so if the sellers aren't able to meet that deadline, you can be able to walk away. You need to protect your time and money. And speaking of money, you need to put there as a clause in the agreement that essentially that, hey, that if the sellers walk away, they cancel, right? And you've put out money for a home inspection and appraisal could easily be $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 that you don't want to be stuck with those costs because the seller decided not to actually sell their home. So you need to have something in writing that protects you as the buyer that you'll be reimbursed for those fees. All right, here's a critical one. Never rely on verbal agreements with the seller. So if the seller says, you see him at the home inspection or at the showing, yeah, we're going to leave the couch, the patio furniture, or freezer in the garage, get it in writing. And not just the purchase contract, right? You need to write up a separate agreement detailing what's being left behind or sold and for how much if there's going to be money involved. So make sure both parties sign it. I've seen so many deals where buyers were promised items verbally, especially patio sets. That's the big one. And then they're gone on move-in day. So if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. Never allow a seller to stay in the home post-closing without a written agreement, specifically a use and occupancy agreement or a leaseback. Now, these arrangements have become quite common due to timing challenges between selling a home and then buying the next. But without a formal lease agreement outlining the terms, you are opening yourself up to some serious legal problems. And the agreement should include a daily rental rate, how long they can stay, and exactly when they must move out. So I once heard a horror story of a seller who gave the buyer early access to move their stuff in before closing. Now, the buyer never showed up, basically at the close of escrow, and they basically became a squatter. So even though that they weren't actually able to close escrow, right, this is the reverse situation, right? It proves the point that never allow somebody to occupy the property without something in writing. So we actually once had a situation where the seller basically couldn't find a place. They were renting, they had filed for BK, and they just told us, hey, we're not going to move out after the close of escrow. But because there was an agreement in place and it was going to cost the seller money, right, they ended up leaving the premises. So at the end of the day, if the next purchase for the seller, right, they need more time to remain in the property, just make sure that you are protected by having an agreement in place. Because whether it be the buyer or the seller, the next purchase falls through, you know what? One party may actually just decide to stay, and now you have a huge legal mess. All right, lastly, keep in mind that some sellers might try to cut corners with do-it-yourself, that Mickey Mouse fixes or covering up issues before listing their home. So if you want to know how to spot all these potential red flags, I actually have another video that's going to walk you through all of that. So make sure you be sure to check that out also. Again, my name's Scott Himelstein with the Scott Himelstein Group. I'm your trusted Los Angeles real estate agent. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you on the next video.